Okay, so thanks everybody for coming to another Hempology 101 lecture. We're getting down, there's only a few more left. I have another guest speaker lined up. I don't think it's next week, the social impact of prohibition. My friend Dan, known as CVC by many, is going to actually do the talk on the effects of prohibition. He's been an advocate working in the field for a very long time and outside of the cannabis industry as well, and so he's got an interesting viewpoint. He's started to speak publicly about it. But today, we're very lucky to have Dieter come up from downtown and talk about the products, medical cannabis products of the Buyers Club, and a little bit about other products that are out there and how they all work. And so really looking forward to hearing Dieter's talk today. Thanks for coming, buddy.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I guess we'll start with some of the basics. Hopefully some of you have been here before and know a little bit about cannabis, but I think when most people think of a cannabis product, they think of a very, very high dose brownie that's used in the recreational market that ends up putting you to sleep and not a whole lot more. But when it comes to cannabis as medicine, there's a massive amount of diversity. So the more we've learned about the plant and the more that you learn about how it can affect certain people, the more differentiation you can have in products, both in dosage and type, and what it contains, how it's prepared, and how it's consumed. There's a wide variance. It is not a very simple plant. I guess we can start with the plant itself. The bud of the plant, the inflorescence, contains most of the active components that we're used to in glands called trichomes. So each plant will have a very different look, very different texture, very different requirements for how it's grown. So you can have outdoor, you can have indoor, you can have plants that take 6 weeks or 10 weeks to finish, and that will all change the makeup of the cannabinoids that are inside of them. We've also found that not just the bud of the plant, but the leaf itself, the stalk, and even in some cases the roots have beneficial properties that can be used in differing ways. So some of the main components of cannabis that we're all well aware of, one of them being THC, is fairly well understood. It's a strong analgesic, it's an anti-inflammatory, it is responsible in great part for the stone, the high that comes along with it. It's pretty well understood for the most part how it works, at least in vitro. There's been a lot of studies on how it works on cells or simple plant models, and there's a lot of information from users that have let us know how it affects them. Unfortunately, there haven't been a great deal of studies on the whole system and how it works, but we can infer a lot of this just from listening to patients that have used it for hundreds and thousands of years. One of the important things to know about THC is that there's a precursor molecule that comes before. There's THC acid, which is the acidic form. When you first harvest a plant, the acidic form is in a greater ratio than the non-acidic form. The acidic form of THC is an anti-inflammatory, but it does not have the psychotropic effects that you would get from the delta-9 THC. So the curing of the plant is actually, over time, can convert this THC acid into THC, but also something called decarboxylizing is a very important process that is used to convert that into its more active form. So decarboxylizing is heating up cannabis to a certain point, generally around 200, 250 degrees, over a length of time to convert that acid form to the non-acid form. CBD likewise has an acid form that is converted over time with heat, though it looks like now with more research that it isn't in the same ratio and it isn't quite at the same temperatures. So you can actually adjust what temperature and for how long you heat cannabis to adjust the effect that comes out of it, the profile that you will achieve afterwards. So that's kind of important to know because that will make a very different product depending on how you're making it. So CBD is another kind of novel cannabinoid that we've always known was in plants, but we didn't quite understand the medicinal benefit of it. A long time ago, cannabis plants most likely had a higher ratio of CBD to THC. As you increase THC, you decrease CBD. It is not completely linear, the relationship, so as you go up 1% in one, it doesn't go down 1% in the other, but it's fairly close. Naturally existing cultivars of cannabis, like Finola hemp, have a very high ratio of CBD to THC, nearly 10 to 1. Now, the interesting thing about CBD in a recreational sense or an effect sense is that it actually does not get you high. Actually, exactly the opposite. It potentiates with THC and lowers the effect of THC on your body. So in a 1-to-1 ratio, generally speaking, CBD, cannabidiol, and THC will have very little effect on your state of mind, your being. What's been shown though with CBD is that it's very good as an anticonvulsant. It's strong. It works very well for anti-anxiety, for PTSD, any kind of stress-related psychological disorder. It seems to work really well at controlling that. So it has a biological and a neurological path to affecting your body. The biological effect is kind of known. That's the one that reduces stress. It's good for anxiety, but the neurological one actually has some strange ones. They're using it down in the States to treat intractable forms of epilepsy in children, like Dravet syndrome. And in that system, it's about putting as much CBD into your body as you can. As opposed to CBD when you're using it for anxiety and stress, that one is one where you're just trying to maintain a low dose of CBD in your body over time. So there's kind of two different routes you can go when consuming both THC and CBD, and that is a low, steady dose at a level that you need to maintain symptom management. And then there's also the route where you're trying to flood your system with as much of these components as possible, generally to stop things like cancer. It's shown to aid in the slowing of metastatic cancers, so the movement of the cells. There's also been some studies to show that it actually aids in apoptosis. And that's the mechanism in cells that normally would cause them to die when they reach the end of their life cycle. But in cancers, because that's turned off, they continue to grow and have a very, very long lifespan. The strange thing about CBD as a medicine is it was bred out. So over 100 years of recreational use in North America, people would select for more effective highs. So if they grew 10 plants and one of them happened to be a very nice stone and the other 9 didn't, they would cut down the other 9 and just keep the one that had the very strong stone. And what they had inadvertently done was selected for a higher THC ratio. So over 100 years of doing this, CBD was virtually bred out of all the strains that we would commonly see on the black market or on the street, and the ones that the genetics that have now become used in the medicinal market, like we do at the Buyers Club down in the States and all of their recreational and medicinal markets. So what we're seeing is a bit of a resurgence in CBD strains. So over time, what they're doing now over the last decade is breeding back in some of those genetics that produced the 1-to-1 ratio where you had an equal amount of THC and CBD. So we've gone over THC and CBD. There's other components in the cannabis plant that have a great deal of medicinal value. One of the interesting things to note is that you can have what people would call an indica and a sativa. So you would know that each one has a very differing effect. An indica would be more sedative and relaxing, whereas a sativa would be more uplifting and energizing. If you were to take them and send them for analysis through HPLC or gas chromatograph, you would see in a lot of these strains that one would have 18% THC and 1% CBD, and another would have 18% THC and 1% CBD. But the effect would be drastically different. So it was kind of a misnomer over time that high THC strains were sativa strains. You know, there was more of the component that we understood. So that must be what's kind of giving us the differential of effect. But we now understand that that's actually not what's going on. There are terpenes, terpenoids, and flavonoids, as well as a whole bunch of other minor cannabinoids that are in very, very low ratios that have a very, very big effect on how it works on your body. Things like beta-myrcene is known to be a very sedative terpenoid. It exists in other plants. It's not unique to cannabis. It's what would give you the quote-unquote couch lock. It seems to aid in sleep. as well as CBN, which is the cannabinoid that's been shown to help with that as well. The strange thing about CBN is it actually occurs when cannabis is aged over time. So if you were to leave cannabis for 2 years in a dark place, the THC in the plant would eventually be converted to CBN. Also, with a considerable amount of heat over time, we would be able to produce a high CBN product. That's also something that the club is considering in the future, is producing a product that is a very, very strong sleep aid. We'd be able to avoid any of the strain-based necessity for inducing sleep, and we would be able to take any strain, given enough heat and time, and turn it into a very strong sleeping aid. Do infusions, so using fatty molecules, olive oil, hemp seed oil, grape seed oil, butter, things like that. What you're doing when you're doing an infusion over time is you're pulling out all the components that are beneficial in that strain. You're not cherry picking one component out and then ranking up or increasing the dosage to get it to a point where they find it effective. Now, unfortunately, in modern medicine, there is a need to be able to say this component does this, it's well studied, we can give it a number, a drug identification number, we can put it through phased clinical trials, and we can know for certain what this is going to do. Cannabis as medicine is a whole plant. So what they're trying to do in modern medicine, big companies, people that are looking to make billions of dollars and also spend millions of dollars to get it through, is take out single components and try and feed them to us without understanding how the whole system works. So it's an allopathic model that doesn't quite work. So that's where dispensaries and the body of knowledge comes in very important in medicinal cannabis, is an understanding and the ability to go through and look at this as a whole plant, to say, as a whole plant, we can still produce a product that is of a standardized or as close to standardized dose and quality as we can. So moving forward, I guess we can explain some of the effects of cannabis. So medicinal cannabis can have a couple of different strong effects. The most noted one, of course, is sleep. So a lot of people use it to help with insomnia. The thing is when somebody's in a great deal of pain, that can be the primary condition. So they have something like arthritis through their body. The secondary conditions that come along with being in a great deal of pain are no sleep, no appetite, quality of living decreases. One of the claims that I like to, or one of the things I like to talk about first when somebody's first being introduced to cannabis is that we may not be able to cure whatever your primary ailment is, but what we can do and what we know we can do is increase your quality of living. So a lot of these products that we offer at the club are designed to manage symptoms to a level where you can continue on with a healthy life, you can get a good night's sleep, you can get your appetite back, you can lower your stress levels. A healthy mind is a healthy body. So there's two sides to that coin, where you're stopping pain, but you're also giving somebody an outlet. The stone itself, as long as it's managed properly and understood, does not have to be a negative component. It can be something that's understood and used. So there's varying dosages and there's varying styles of medicine. One thing to note is that when you decarboxylize cannabis, you convert it to that acid form, but it also makes it more sedative. So the acidic form of cannabis is now being used in medicine through things like juicing or the raw herb itself. So people are finding that's very beneficial because it's non-psychoactive. The Cannabis Buyers Club now offers a large list of CBD products. So the nice thing about being able to offer a CBD-rich product is it's more widely acceptable to a greater audience. When you can say we have a product that has most of the benefits of traditional cannabis without any of these psychoactive secondary effects. So you can do things like continue to drive, remember where you left your car keys, wake up in the morning without feeling groggy. So there are ways to consume cannabis without it having major side effects on your day-to-day life. One of the standard products that we sell, which everyone is pretty aware of, is just a regular cookie. So likewise to when I first started the conversation, we were talking about brownies, high dosage brownies. We don't produce anything that has a massively high dose. To us and to me, it makes more sense to be able to produce something that's standardized, but at a reasonable dose, that if somebody is to consume a whole one, they'll still be able to function. So these cookies are wonderful for people that are suffering from arthritis and chronic pain, for people that need sleep aids at night, stuff like that. So it's kind of your basic bare bone edible. It's made from the leaf of the plant, which is also a little strange. So the inflorescence, the bud of the plant, contains quite a bit of the cannabinoids that we're all looking for in a cannabis product, but the leaf of the plant also has quite a lot as well. It's something that you can get for relatively cheap, because generally it does not have a secondary use, but it's something that can be very effective when produced properly. So that includes decarboxylizing and then an infusion into butter. So it's pretty straightforward. There's not much to know about it. It's just a standard cookie. One of the things we're most proud of at the club recently is producing a wide range of capsules or pills. So if you're to think of this truly as medicine, then there should be alternatives to consuming things that have wheat or gluten or sugar in them. The cookie method of ingestion is one that people are very used to, but that doesn't mean that it's the best way to consume. So you can go all the way from products at the very bottom, like rhinol, which is made from the leaf of the plant, much like the cookie. So that it's a very standardized low dose that's very good for sleep and pain relief. Something like stockinol, which is a product that's produced from the stalk of the plant. Now, this one is a weird one, the stockinol, because the stalk of the plant is not something that you would normally consider to be something that has a great deal of medicinal value. But even through testing at labs and through experiential evidence of the patients that we serve, the stalk of the plant, when infused in olive oil, has some strange effects. Things like chronic migraines. So there's something that we don't understand in there that has a differential effect from the leaf of the plant. Now, the stalks have very few of the trichomes, the glandular bodies that normally carry most of the cannabinoids. So that means there's something else in the stalks that offers that additional benefit. I don't know what it is. I don't think we've ever figured out what it is. Looking at the test results, it's very similar to some of our other products, like can oil, but there's just something different in the stalk of the plant. Then you can take steps up. So we do make oil-infused products out of the bud of the plant. And that's a way to get a little more of these cannabinoids in each one of these small packages, all the way up to a resin capsule. So the glandular trichomes on the outside of cannabis can be removed. There's multiple ways to do it. In the recreational market right now, you'll see a lot of people referring to things like shatter, butter, wax, even the traditional honey oils. Those are created using solvents. Things like naphtha, butane, isopropyl. They can be done in a way that they aren't as dangerous as they could be. This is kind of a touchy subject. When producing extracts, you have to be careful on the solvents you're using, because the idea is that they're supposed to be able to extract all the THC and the other cannabinoids and then heat them up to the point where the solvents are then, they go volatile. They reach a boiling point that is lower than the cannabinoids themselves. Because we can't guarantee that that's actually what's going on, we don't produce products like that. So we do everything as an infusion. But the problem is when you do an infusion with olive oil or another fatty lipid is you're not actually technically concentrating the product. You're diluting it. There's no way to take something like olive oil, infuse it, and then take that body of olive oil and squeeze it down. Like you can't boil it off like you can boil off water, or you could boil off something like butane. So what we do is we take the trichomes of the plant and mechanically separate them. So this is called, we call it keef. Some people just call it hash, sieve hash, or in some cases actually hippie crack, which is an old name for it. What this allows us to do is then create a concentrated product, not by using a solvent, by actually mechanically removing the highest concentration part of the plant. So we're able to produce a pill that has about 30 milligrams of THC in each one, which is a considerable dose. When you're looking at something like one of our cookies, I believe they're sitting at anywhere between 8 and 12 milligrams. Something like stockinol or rhinol is sitting at about 3 milligrams. So you can see kind of the stages in dosing. Now, the one that doesn't fit in that standard indica sativa, uplifting, energizing, or sedative, low dose, high dose kind of graph is CBD and non-decarb or low heat. So we talked about the acidic form of THC and the other cannabinoids. The low heat can oil is one where the infusion process before happening, we don't decarboxylize the product. So we don't put it in the oven and heat it up and convert the acid form. It goes directly in and then it gets infused over 16 hours. So what you're left with is a different ratio, more of the acidic form and less of the delta 9 form of THC. So it's good for anti-inflammatory, but it doesn't get you stoned. Likewise, CBD products that we've got out, the CBD can oil or the CBD hash caps, have very little stone involved with them. So what we're seeing is a lot more people over the age of 50 coming into the club with things like arthritis, Parkinson's, cancer, that are looking for alternatives to the traditional high. So it's pretty amazing to be able to offer something that is, in some cases, shown to be anti-carcinogenic or anti-cancer, anti-metastatic. It's been shown to be good for spasticity, so any sort of shaking. So both the THC acid and CBD work really well for those. There's some videos on the internet now, and videos done by people like Sanjay Gupta on CNN that drastically show the ability of CBD and the acidic form of lots of these components to completely halt shaking in all sorts of disorders, Parkinson's and Dravet syndrome and epilepsy and things like that. So many believe this is the future of where cannabis products lie, at least in the sense of where the most ground needs to be made up in understanding and how they work. So we hope to continue to develop more CBD products like this, just because they have so many benefits to the people that use them. So we've talked about consuming cannabis orally. I guess it's a good time to explain bioavailability. Cannabis, when eaten raw by itself, has very little bioavailability because it hasn't been bound to a fat molecule. It's not in immersion in alcohol. You're not going to, your body's not going to absorb it. It'll go through your digestive system. It'll be, dissolved and broken down like it was spinach, and not much will happen. So there needs to be a co-potentiator with cannabis to increase its bioavailability. So it needs to be bound in a fat molecule or alcohol. Now the other thing is the mode of consumption. When you smoke cannabis traditionally, you get about 18%, sometimes less, sometimes more, of the actual, so say something has 20% THC, of that 20% that's initially in there, you're only going to get 18% of that. So it's very wasteful. They figure between 50 and 60% of it is lost to side stream. So that means in the inhalation process, the smoke that you see everywhere else, you're not using. Also, there's limitations to how much cannabinoids can cross the blood barrier in your lungs. It is not the most efficient way to be consuming it. People consume it that way because it's nearly instantaneous. So when you smoke cannabis, effects can be felt sometimes within 30 seconds. At the longest, it should take 5 or 8 minutes before you're getting the full effect. When you consume cannabis orally, so when you eat it, the bioavailability jumps from 18% to, in some cases, as high as 40%. So the problem with consuming cannabis orally is that it takes time. So anywhere between 4 and 6 hours before the maximum plasma levels are achieved in your blood. So that means there has to be some level of understanding. You have to predict. You have to say, I took a cookie 4 hours ago. It's going to start wearing off in another 2. That means I have to eat one now, so that as the levels in your blood shrink, you can catch it on the way down and bring it back up. Because if you're spiking up and down and up and down and up and down all day, then you're in pain, you're not in pain. You're in pain, you're not in pain. Or you're shaking, you're not shaking. So that's not very effective. So a lot of people, that's why they use smoking in conjunction with edibles. One of the things through research that's been shown is the best bioavailability for consuming cannabis is actually rectally and sublingually. So we at the club have been in the process of developing a suppository for the last 4 months. It sounds weird, it's not something you're used to, but the bioavailability of rectally and sublingually jumps to about 68 to 70%. So 18% to 80%. That is a massive jump in efficiency for your body to actually increase the uptake, to use it. One of the other novel features of taking it rectally is it's a linear curve. So the more you put in, the more is used. Because when you consume orally, it's a first pass. It takes a pass through your liver. The efficiency drops over time. Like you cannot continue to consume more. It becomes less efficient. Also, it peaks. There's a bell curve. So instead of the effect going up, plateauing, and then dropping down, it slowly rises, peaks, and then drops off. But when you take it rectally or sublingually below your tongue, the dose takes effect very, very quickly, as opposed to orally. You can get full effects within about 30 minutes, and then your blood plasma levels stay steady. So you don't have these massive spikes. So that shows them kind of a future for the product, is both rectally and sublingually. We're looking into producing a sublingual product using glycerin as the base, but we don't at this point currently use any alcohol. For lots of reasons, alcohol isn't always the best way to help somebody that's sick. Something like Sativex, which is an alcohol spray, it does work. It's nice because it's fast acting, but we're hoping to find some alternatives that avoid that alcohol route. So beyond any of those oral consumption methods, or rectally or sublingually, there's topical. So the endocannabinoid system, the system that's actually reacting with these components in your body, is everywhere. It's made up of two different types, CB1 and CB2 receptors. The CB1 receptors are generally through your nervous system, so your brain, your peripheral nervous system, stuff like that. CB2 exists in your lymph system and is all throughout the body. So that's more tissue-based. It's not nerve-based, so that's the actual tissue. So you can apply cannabis topically. It works really, really well. You avoid a lot of the secondary effects that you would normally get from orally consuming it, but you also get targeted benefits. So for things like arthritis, where you know where the pain is, when you ingest it, what you're doing is you're flooding your whole body with cannabinoids, so that you're trying to stop the pain in your knee, but what you're doing is you're numbing your entire body. Topically, it works really well. It crosses the barrier through your skin, and then it targets the place where the pain relief is needed. So there's all sorts of topical applications. Salves are a very simple one. Massage oils are a very simple one. So our most basic product is just an olive oil infusion. It's the leaf of cannabis infused in olive oil with vitamin E added as a preservative. It's a little bit messy, but it's amazing how it can help some people. A lot of people use cannabis for chronic pain issues. So for them to be able to apply something topically is really important. It seems to work really well for them. The other neat thing is when you apply cannabis topically, there's some evidence to show that it's actually priming the receptors. So the lock and key analogy applies to the endocannabinoid system. So you have a key in your body that's waiting for a certain shape of molecule to come in and bind with it and then regulate the system. The endocannabinoid system is shown to be very important in maintaining the homeostasis of your body's systems. So it keeps everything in balance. So a lot of the time these disorders are an imbalance. So when you apply it topically, it seems to prime those receptors. When they've been used a couple of times, they become warmed up. They're ready to go. So then when you consume cannabis through another route, so say you apply it topically, you get the instantaneous pain relief of the cannabis, then you smoke it or you eat it, it seems to work in conjunction. There's once again this entourage effect that the sum of the parts are far greater than the whole. You wouldn't expect them to work as well as they do. At the club, we also use some traditional herbs to go along with them. Things like arnica, which works very, very well for joint-related problems. Things like camphor and comfrey, even something as simple as peppermint eucalyptus. If you're adding the peppermint and the eucalyptus to a massage oil, what you're doing is you're getting an added hot and cold effect. So we actually have these oils, but then we make salves where you're adding wax to the mixture, beeswax, and then it becomes a little bit more manageable to put on. As I was talking about the peppermint and the eucalyptus, we have something called the green lion, where you add cinnamon and peppermint, and what you get is more or less Ruba 8535 or Tiger Balm. So you can add other things to cannabis. When you consider it to be a whole plant medicine and not a single component that needs to be regulated, like oxytocin or something like that, you can then add other things to it. It can be conjunctive medicine, whole plant medicine. It doesn't just need to be that single component. So the things like these salves, there's lots of different types that you can make that have differences of effect. So there's actually some uses that are both a combination of topical and edible. We produce lozenges. So the idea behind a lozenge is it's something that you can put in your mouth and let dissolve, and then it coats your throat, and it works very well for any sort of above the shoulder problem. One of the neat effects of THC and some of the other cannabinoids is they're strong antimicrobial and antifungicides. So they work for infection. So topical infections, if you have an abscessed tooth, they work very well. They have a 1-2 punch of not only helping to stop the infection, but also bring down the inflammation, the secondary inflammation that's associated with an infection. So these have been amazing for some people that have toothaches, abscesses, cracked tooth, sore throat, things like that. It just goes to show that there isn't really a one-shot thing happening here. Cannabis is effective in all sorts of different ways for all sorts of different problems. When producing any of these products, we actually have a lot of byproduct. So because we're not using those polar solvents to pull out every last drop of all the active components, because it's a fairly non-invasive infusion procedure, you're left over with lots of leaf that still has lots of active components left in it. So we produce something here, which is called the Eccles square, where when producing edibles, that leaf that's left over still has a very, very large amount left in it. So we take the whole plant, the mash that was used in the infusion, and then we create a fruit bar out of it. What you're left with is a very large dose, but one that's also more sedative than it was before. One of the neat properties of infusions is you're using heat. So over time, you're actually decarboxylizing them more. So the oil that you got out will be more sedative, but the product that's left behind seems to be even more sedative. So it's another way that you can use the whole plant without wasting any of the stuff that goes with it.
You should mention it's a little extra
crunchy,
tough on
the
digestive system.
That's another important part about making cannabis products. So the cannabis plant has some little tiny hooks on it. You can't see them with the naked eye. They're very small, but they can be an irritant to that digestive tract. When producing cannabis products, it's really important to be able to produce a product that's actually palatable, because you heard stories about everybody, in the 70s when they would make it, and they'd take a whole bunch of leaf, put it in a butter, fry it up until it was black, and then dump the whole thing into something else and make brownies that tasted like, burnt greens and burnt butter. That doesn't work. It's not effective. So the idea is that you have to maintain temperatures to the point where you're effectively doing what you want, which is decarboxylizing or infusing. The heat itself helps in the infusion process. Then straining what you don't want, which is the leaf. Generally speaking, people don't want to have it. And then putting into another product where the flavor of whatever you're consuming isn't so overpowering that it becomes unpalatable. So that all comes with just a lot of experience over 18 years Ted had working with these products to reach levels that are effective. Not all medicine has to taste good, but it helps if it isn't absolutely horrible. So I think we've achieved that on almost all of our products. They're at a effective dosage level, but aren't disgusting. I guess I could open the floor to some questions just in the middle here. Anyone?
Ted said you guys were making a mango capsule.
Oh, a mango lozenge.
Yeah, lozenge.
Yeah, so that lozenge I was describing, the one I was holding up, I believe, is a goji berry lozenge. So it's a Chinese wolfberry, which in itself is shown to be a strong antioxidant. Cannabis is also an antioxidant. That's kind of one of the properties that shows beneficial effect over a long period. Anytime you remove oxidation, then free radicals are reduced. That means that cancer levels drop. Free radicals in your blood, those little things shooting off, those extra electrons, are what destroy DNA. Whereas the mango one is very similar, but mango is shown to be a co-potentiator of THC. It's not very well understood. A lot of this is just kind of, anecdotal. But it's shown that it seems to be shown that there is some sign for the terpenoids in mangoes are ones that exist in cannabis. So what you're doing is you're increasing something that would exist in small amounts in certain cannabis. That mango scent that you would actually get on certain strains of cannabis is somehow having an entourage effect with the THC that is inherent in the infusion. So we'd like to say it's more effective medicinally, But it's pretty hard to know. I think it's a pretty small effect.
Yeah.
You might be able to do some studies where you would take the extract of one of those pure terpenoids and THC, mess with the ratios and give them to people, and you should be able to see a difference. We haven't had much of a reported increase in effect. The other thing when you're taking medicine is there's a strong expectancy effect. So when you go through a sign up at a club like ours, they're going to tell you what the product should do. A lot of the time, you will have a differential of effect just based on what you expect. If you look at it and go, that's not going to work, then a lot of it you'll have a different, experience. So I think when it comes to things like these mango lozenges, yes, there's something going on there. They're easier to eat and they taste better than the goji berries, which is important for a lot of people. But there may be a small difference there. We're not really entirely sure. The research is still out on that. One of the problems is that because this is a controlled drug both in Canada and the United States, in the United States I believe it's Schedule 1 still, isn't it? Which means it has absolutely no medicinal benefit. It's on par with heroin, meth. They can't do research. Every time they try, they can't get funding. You get blackballed. Universities won't want to work with you. So there's been a lot of secondary research on single components where they could say, okay, we're going to test this one chemical and we can work with that, but there's been very little on the whole plant itself. It's just so difficult to get any research done. Hopefully we're seeing a change here, a shift in policy, at least on a state level. And in Canada now that we're switching over to this new program, the MMPR, there's more dollars behind it. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do the research, but here's to hoping that questions like this will actually have answers. The therapeutic benefits are fairly limitless for this plant. I think Ted's given talks probably on hemp as a plant itself, and it has many benefits as well. So it's been a much maligned product. With some great more understanding and some scientific research, we could produce some products that would meet stronger criteria. It's one of the things at the club that we cry for. We say we would like to be regulated. Build a framework where we could participate, meet standards, do testing more easily, not have to hide. That's one of the things that you'll hear about next week, is that this is one of the problems with prohibition. You've taken a product that needs to be understood and barred any sort of real discussion from happening. So cannabis clubs all across the world are probably the single greatest body of information on medicinal products. And it's a first step, but we don't have access to the labs. We need to, the people, the skills, the knowledge. We've done a lot of work with what we have, but there's certainly more that could be done. Any more questions? No?
What did you say was the other way directly? Superliminal? Subliminal?
Subliminal, yes.
What is the difference between that and eating a lozenge?
Eating the lozenge, when you're taking it sublingually, it's generally alcohol or glycerin. Both of those have very speedy, they cross the barrier very quickly. When you have a lozenge, it does cross to some degree, like it would with a topical, but it's a very slow process because you're eating it, because you're salivating. It kind of gets washed away. So some of it will cross that barrier right away, but generally it has to be in alcohol, where what you're getting is it hits, it evaporates, the alcohol evaporates, and you're left with the cannabinoids that cross very easily. Likewise with glycerin, it seems to cross very quickly as well. So that's kind of the difference between those two products. But it's a very efficient method of ingestion. But it also, because you're getting a very fast effect, you're not getting a prolonged effect. So that's where oral consumption in something that needs to be digested and has to be passed through your liver has a benefit, because you can get between 4 and 24 hours of symptom relief. It's not something where you have to keep redosing every time that you feel something happening. But like I said, the downside when you're orally consuming something is you may get 4 to 24 hours of symptom relief, but because it takes 2 to 4 hours before it kicks in, you can have long periods of it not being effective. So part of using medicinal cannabis is educating a patient to know how to consume it properly, so that they have this basic understanding of this is how it's working in your body. These are the signs of how it works. You should keep a diary. You should write down when you consumed it, when it took effect, when it plateaued, when it started to fall down. Then look at that data or bring it into us, and we'll say, based on your symptoms, what you're describing, you should be taking this product now, this product then. A big problem is that normally in a good relationship with the general practitioner that's prescribing something, there's a discussion, a dialogue happening. Under the current regime with cannabis here and in the United States, the doctor gives a blanket prescription to a plant and then has very little knowledge on how to help you figure out how to consume it. Not only that, but they're not actually allowing patients to consume anything but the raw herb itself, either vaporized or smoked. That's kind of where the dispensaries fall in the middle there. You're able to continue the discussion with the patient. They're not left hanging trying to figure this stuff out themselves. I can understand where doctors are coming from too, because what they've been told is we'll allow you to prescribe the whole plant but give you no tools to explain how to use it. It'd be like a doctor saying, here's 50 pounds of opium poppies, go make your own morphine and figure out how to use it. It just doesn't work. You cannot plug a whole plant into a single component medical system.
Do you want to explain the patch to folks?
Oh, the can patch, sure. So we talked about topical applications. One of the byproducts, the leftovers that we would normally throw out, we actually produce a poultice, or a cannapatch. It's not something that we're used to in the last 50 years as a mode of medicine, but previous to that, poultices and patches were everywhere. It was a very effective way of treating a specific ailment. So what you have is just cheesecloth with the leftover product left in it, so the leaf with a little bit of olive oil, and it becomes very effective for bruises, localized pain, injury. You leave it in your freezer so that it's always cold. If you get a shiner, you can bring it out, use it as a replacement for the 12-ounce steak or the peas that you're going to ruin for your next soup. It's more or less just like a Solve or massage oil. It's just very cheap, and it's a nice way that you can place it on there, put a wrap on, and leave it. Some of the things that cannabis has shown, I guess, to be the most effective, the quickest, is things like burns. So we have a salve that's has a similar effect to this. It aids in healing of all sorts of skin problems amazingly. Even things that are really difficult to treat generally, like eczema, it does a pretty good job. But burns especially, it's pretty amazing how fast things like sunburns or a spot burn can heal with the use of these cannabis products. Where to go from here? I guess the future of the market. There's two ways that the market could go, the legal market. They can continue to press for drug identification numbers, very specific products tailored to specific ailments, or hopefully they'll find a way to say, you know what, this doesn't belong in the pharmaceutical industry, this belongs as a health food natural product. They're trying to kind of expecting the best of both worlds. So hopefully the United States, we're going to see this boom of understanding of edible products and infusions and the risks of things like shatters and waxes and butters, better production practices. What is a safe way to store this when it's in this form or in this form? Long-term studies, 10 years, say how does consuming it orally differ from smoking it over this period? I think we're going to see the United States kind of go far ahead. They seem to have a greater acceptance of edible and topical products. Here in Canada, I don't think we're going to see the new industry, at least in the short term, have a greater acceptance for edible and topical products. There's a conflict of interest. If you can allow somebody to get a license to produce cannabis, which is fairly simple in the greater scheme of things, to grow cannabis under the new MMPR is a lot simpler than to, say, produce Tylenol or an antiviral drug. Produce their own edible products, it invalidates patents. So if a company in Canada says we're going to produce Sativex, which is fairly simple, you're taking the plant, you're extracting one component, and then putting it in alcohol and making a spray, spend $10 million getting it through human trials, and then a company can go get a license for growing medical cannabis, produce the same thing in their back office, and sell it for 1/100th of the price. You can see where the conflict arises. So hopefully the United States, because they're not in that same place, will see growth, and hopefully we can follow suit. But yeah, it deserves to be treated differently than it is right now, that's for sure. I think I'm done.
Well, I was going to ask if you could explain how the club's going to proceed into the new regulations with these products.
Oh, yeah, I guess it could. So the club moving forward, we're just about at a transition period where we're switching from a largely unregulated cottage industry of small-scale operations. So, 1-3 people producing cannabis. That's pretty much it. That's kind of where we fit in going forward. We're going to be championing alternative modes of ingestion. No matter how you cut it, when you're smoking cannabis, it's not going to be good for you. There may be no causal link between cannabis and long-term health problems, but there's certainly correlations. So that means that there are some relationships between poor lung health and excessive cannabis smoking. It hasn't been shown to cause cancer or anything like that, but it's obviously not the best way to be consuming it. Vaporization is likewise another option, but even that isn't effective for some people. Oral consumption, cannabis is medicine through cookies, pills, suppositories, sprays, salves. It offers relief to a far greater cross-section of ill people. So that's kind of where we're going to continue to produce and hopefully educate both healthcare practitioners, politicians, municipal politicians, and patients. It seems it's a shame that there isn't more being done on a federal level to actually consider this as an option. But we'll continue to plug on with the resources we have available and the people that we're working with to develop new products, better understand and educate. So that's why things like this are important, is to offer that level of education. Because a lot of the science is out there to some degree, it just needs to be collated and translated into plain English. It's pretty hard to read sometimes.
I guess one more question. Is there a way for a person to know what is in their product if they're buying it from another source, another dispensary or someone? Is
there any way for them to get it tested? Yeah. There kind of is. So any of the labs that are going to be opening in the future are going to require that you have a license under the MMPR. Previously, labs generally required that you had a license under the MMAR. So there are ways they could legally get them tested. They would have to apply for an MMPR license and then take that license with a product to a lab, and then they'd be able to test. There are labs that are considering just taking anything in for testing, but we're unsure how that's going to go as of yet. So you could get products from other places tested, but like I said, you would have to have a license under the new program. So your doctor would have to fill out the paperwork. You would have to send it off to a licensed producer. They would send you back a confirmation, and then you would then be able to take a product in. But as for labs willing to work with just the general public, there may be some, but they're not being very forthcoming about it, at least to the public. So we'll see if that changes.
Do you want to throw a pitch in for a recipe book?
Online? Sure. If you go to our website, v-cbc.ca/recipe-book, most of our recipes are on there and our basic production guidelines. We're working on a new one that's more in depth, explains a lot of the science of what we do, the methodology behind it, because that's kind of important. The idea behind almost all the products we produce is anybody else should be able to do this at home. We're not creating something that is so difficult or hard to understand that you couldn't do it properly in the safety of your home with a basic understanding of what you're dealing with. Part of the reason for not using any of these solvents like naphtha, butane, isopropyl, they tend to explode when used improperly. So we don't do that. And so all the products we develop eventually will be able to be, any patient can go, okay, I'd like to be able to do this myself, here you go. We're not cornering the market, we're not hoarding information. Everything is as open and free to everyone else as possible, because there's no reason that we should be the only ones that do this. A lot of patients can't do it themselves because they're in a lot of pain, or they just don't have the ability to do it. But that doesn't mean that most shouldn't be able to do this themselves with proper access to the key ingredients that go into it.
I have a specific question, but what is your best product for loss of appetite?
Loss of appetite. Well, there's Abutable is a good product because it's twofold. It has the effect of increasing appetite because it is a fairly high dose of decarboxylized leaf. A little sedative, but generally what happens is when you're coming down from consuming cannabis, that's kind of when most of the appetite seems to increase. So as you go up, that's when you have the greatest effect, and you plateau. But the Buddha balls are a meal replacement. So whey protein, soy protein, hemp hearts, coconut, almond powder, whole rolled oats, honey. So it's like a little 8-ounce steak in a ball. So that gets a lot of people through wasting disorders that are secondary to chemotherapy or just the cancer itself, depending on what it is. It's one of the unfortunate things that smoking is often, or vaporizing is often, really good for appetite. Edibles can help, but for a lot of patients it seems like smoking or vaporizing is the best thing. And generally it seems to be sativas for most people. There also is inverse effects. So some people have reversals of the way they respond. Cannabis is not a simple product, and the human body is not a simple product. So there are no surefire answers. There has to be a conversation to figure out what works for you. So there has to be a fair bit of experimentation. The nice thing about cannabis is the LD50, so the dosage required for 50% of the standard population to achieve death is nearly impossible to meet. So that means you can experiment within reason to figure out what works for you, as long as you understand what's going on.
What is the blue ball? Like a little...
I didn't bring one today, sorry.
It's a little ball. Yeah.
And if you eat this,
It's kind of like an energy ball.
Yeah.
how would you eat it if you have no appetite? You gotta force it.
You have to you'll force it down to some degree, or you take a small bite. It's very appetizing though.
Oh yeah, like I suffer from viral wasting, and like with one of the best right there. Like I mean, like you hit the first bite, you don't think you're gonna eat the rest of it. You're like, and you go to lie down. Like 5 minutes later, I'm like back in the fridge for more and like, oh my god.
Yeah, they were designed for people with cancer and AIDS that were essentially dying and couldn't eat very much. A Buddha ball has enough protein energy to keep them alive for a day, and so a Buddha ball a day will keep you going.
And then sometimes within 20 minutes or half an hour later, that's when the strong appetite will kick in. And there's also issues like IBS and Crohn's, where that's a really difficult one to treat, because or things like GERD, G-E-R-D, gastric reflux. Because there's a balance to be struck where you reach a dose and it's effective, they have appetite, or they have pain relief and inflammation relief, but if you go too far, it can actually backfire on itself. So there's a balance to be struck for some things. Likewise, if you're trying to improve your appetite, you eat one cookie and you're like, wow, I might have an appetite in 20 minutes. Then you go, well, I'm going to eat 6 more cookies, and then you're asleep for 16 hours. Well, that doesn't really help with your appetite because you're not eating, you're sleeping.
This makes you a lot, but I know you can't die from smoking pot.
Nope.
Now, what about these folks who are experimenting with these whole dabs?
Yeah, like 99%
like
THC.
Yeah.
We did the math about 2 weeks ago, and it's physically possible to consume. If you had 99% THC, so resin dabs, it would be about a golf ball size, and it would have to be consumed. Now, the way LD50 works is they're assuming that whatever is being, whatever you're intaking is instantly there. The problem is when you're consuming it through, you're going through your liver, you're going through your stomach and your intestines. So there's a limit to how much can cross that barrier, and it's not linear how much can be absorbed. So the way
you're losing again.
yeah, you're losing it, or you'd pass out
You'd
before
have to actually eat the shower.
you'd have to be force fed. Yeah, and even then it shouldn't be an issue. The way you would, in theory, reach toxicity would be 100% reduction, and it would have to be injected. And it would, the injection itself of that much of a mass would probably be what killed you from an aneurysm before the cannabis ever did. So it's not as toxic as, say, something like Advil. There are so many OTC drugs that a whole bottle will kill somebody, and they're wholly unregulated. They have a warning label on the bottle. You can walk in and buy them. You can eat the whole bottle, and there you go. So when it comes to managing the risk associated with it, most of what we're having to deal with is stigma, lies, and poor publicity. It's not actually factual information. We're not looking at this in a realistic way. If you remove all that and start to look at it as what it actually is, the conversation becomes a lot easier. And we're getting to that point, but there's a lot of other stuff that comes with it, baggage.
Well, thank you so very much. You used a lot of big words I don't even try to. And,
Make out your hour for you.
yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to go double check the lecture next week.
Oh, I made it.
Yeah, you
It's
did.
actually an hour.
Oh, yeah?
No, it's
Cannabis
two.
and the law. So that'll be my lecture. I'll talk about our court case that Dieter mentioned and the injunction that's being filed to keep the MMAR going and other issues to deal with court. So that'll be next week. But thanks again, Dieter, for coming up.
Thank you, guys.
And thanks for coming, folks. Have a great day. Smoke something on.